How's it going, everybody? We're back yet again for another One Piece chapter discussion. How is it going? I think this is 1172. I keep forgetting the numbers now. They're getting so big, you know? One Piece has been going on for so long now. It's getting huge, and I keep forgetting the numbers of the chapters because I just to be reading them. Oh, man. Oda knows how to put the final cherry on top. Do you know what I mean? This was such a good way to reestablish Harold, reestablish Yorl. And let me explain what I'm talking about, right? Because all through this kind of flashback and arc, I was like, oh, so it's going to be up with Yorl. He'll forget. He'll be kind of evil to some degree. He'll forget because there's a sword in his head. And we were all like, oh, man. What Harold was doing, obviously we understood, but it was an interesting way to have your character do things. But the way it was done and the approach that was taken for them not telling the world what Harold did or what happened with Harold is just great. You know what I mean? It's just amazing. I think having it so they wanted to protect his ideals and make it so they weren't looking for revenge. I honestly think that's a great way to look at it, right? They were worried that if people found out what happened to Harold, it would cause an uprising because he was so loved and so deeply cared about among the Elbath people. What he did for the Elbath people can never be undone. And I think that's an interesting way to do it, and an interesting way to have Loki still leave and have all these things have such an emotional center to it. And I know it was just a speech, but it was just so well done, and it kept the mix of the two values that we've been talking about this entire arc was perfectly shown in this chapter. We were like, by the end of Elbath, you're going to see the warrior culture and the peace culture that Harold was building be merged together, and we're already seeing that. Because yes, the Elbath Giants have made a stand, made a declaration against the world government, but it is for the express purpose of protecting the peace. And that is just, honestly, I know I jumped straight into the end of the chapter, but it was amazing. We also see something interesting I wasn't expecting, which was Zoro versus Dorian Broggy by the looks of it. If I go back to the final panel right now, I just need to double check it before I make any statements. Yeah, so it looks like Zoro is going towards Dorian Broggy. And to be honest, that is pretty hype. A Zoro versus Dorian Broggy thing. Even, because obviously it's setting up for the idea that Zoro will take on one of them, and then Sanji will take on the other. And you know what's even better? We got an Usopp moment. It was small, but it means Oda hasn't forgotten about Usopp and his connection to Elbath. So he's coming. He's gonna get his moment, and I wonder what it is. I really do, and it's gonna have to do with Dorian Broggy. So it could be a Zoro versus Usopp. That's a combination we haven't seen since Enies Lobby, but we know it works, and it's quite an entertaining combination. So that might be a really cool combination, because Zoro is the second strongest in the crew. So if we were gonna have Usopp develop and get stronger, the only way for him to do that without dying would be to have the support of another character. And I think Zoro is a perfect character for that because of his want to protect the crew. But also, there might be a moment in this fight, let's say they fight together, Usopp and Zoro, where Zoro gets incapacitated or something happens to Zoro and Usopp has to step up, and that's when this moment happens. Because it would be a nice callback to Enies Lobby, but it's also a combination we don't see that much. You know, we're getting to the stage near the end of One Piece. You want to have different combinations of fighters together. And I know I said this with Queen and King. I was like, oh, they're going to, Zoro and Sanji are going to fight together. You know, they're having them together. But then he separated them. But the reason I don't think this is going to happen if Zoro and Usopp fight, because I feel like Usopp has to fight Dorian Broggy. I don't see... He could definitely be involved with Nami and saving the kids. I think Nami is going to play a crucial role in saving the kids. Nami, Robin, and Saul probably, and Chopper as well. But I don't see, personally, a thing where Usopp can't be involved. Usopp isn't involved in Dorian Broggy's fight and resolution in some regard. There was a part of me that thought, oh, this is definitely going to be like a Luffy and Loki thing, or a Harden and Loki thing. But I'm starting to come to the idea that it might be a Zoro and Usopp thing, or even a Zoro, Sanji and Usopp thing. In whatever way, we see right now that Harden's coming, so we could have the best of all the worlds. You know, we could have a big, huge, massive fight against Dory and Broggy because they are, 1 billion plus fighters. They are considered like relative to Harold, at least stated in the flashback to some degree. So if we have that be legit and they are like one of the best fighters in the verse, which I don't know if that's legit. I mean, they still lost to Mr. 3. I know it was old One Piece before hockey was introduced, but it's going to be a hard sell. But with Dami Reverse, it increases the power to such a degree that I just feel like, you know, I feel like you could justify it that way. Do you know what I mean? Like, to take out Rocks, it took Roger and Garp to do such a thing. So characters who are quite a degree lower. No, I said they were equal to Harold. That's not true. Like, let's say their first commander level, right? Like, when they get boosted, they're incredible. So to take a load of, like, let's say 4 or 5 characters to beat, so you could get all these story beats together in one go. And then, for example, let's say it starts off as a big, huge fight and then divulges into Zoro versus Usopp. But then at some stage, Usopp and Zoro will have to prioritize protecting the crew while they are trying to protect the children. And then we have, like, let's say, Loki and Horden come in and finish the job. Now, you can also say Loki is very clearly going to fight Emu. He now has a very clear motivation to want to kick this guy's head in. Do you know what I mean? It's a very clear motivation. Even Summers, like, I do wonder who's going to fight Summers. Like, I'm trying to see who like matches up with them well, because we still have these Holy Knights to match up with. We still, like, we can see the Fishman resemblance in the other guy. I actually can't remember his name, but it just seems reductive to say, oh, that's Jinbei's fight, because there's been no build up to that whatsoever. But Jinbei doesn't have a built up fight. Like, Brook is very clearly going to be involved in the Gunko fight at some stage, in the Emu fight, because he has to somehow be related to Brook or somehow be related to Gunko, right? So that's obviously being set up. But, like, I don't know, man, where Jinbei can fit in besides fighting the Fishman, but it feels really reductive to say that's his only moment in the arc, because every Straw Hat has something they care about in this arc, right? We've got children being abducted and taken advantage of for Chopper and Nami, because we saw their reaction to this whole thing happening in both, well, the medical side of things with Chopper in, like, Thriller Bark, and the kid thing with Chopper and Nami in Punk Hazard. So seeing that then done without the medical side of things, we know Chopper has a care for children, and obviously he has to somehow be able to negate disability to some degree. Maybe that can be, you can easily work around saying that somehow, right? And Brook could be a key component as well. Music, we know Oda loves his music. That could be a thing as well, right? Like, let's say Brook somehow manages to undo Emu's hold on Gunko's soul, but it's not only that, it somehow nullifies the Thorn ability, because they mentioned that again, they brought that up. And as far as I remember, the more you care for something as you try to free them, the more painful the thorns are. So the approach I'm kind of seeing here is like either a Brook, like when Emu goes away, they have to abandon the plan because something happened to Emu and Emu's more important. So then Brook releasing the hold on Gunko could work like that. And then let's say Gunko is brought back to the Mary Joa, but we now have all the information. We have Brook's backstory with Gunko. Gunko knows this. We might have an excuse to go to Mary Joa and see what's going on. Or Gunko stays here, tells the crew what's going on in Mary Joa, and then we have an excuse to go to Mary Joa. Because I've been talking about a Mary Joa arc for years. Everyone can tell, go back and see. I've been saying I wanted this to happen. One thing I will stand by, and I've said this, I even said this in the last video about, Blackbeard killing Emu. I am so confident Blackbeard is going to be the final villain. I just feel it in my bones. But that's regardless. That's because I kind of think Blackbeard might be attacking Mary Joa, but it could be Dragon. Like, I feel like Dragon has to do something this year. Like, I've been talking up Dragon for ages, and I know he wasn't even mentioned in this chapter, and we were talking matchups 5 minutes ago. But I feel like because I'm moving towards Mary Joa, I think he has to do something this year because the God Knights moved and we've seen them move, we're seeing their movesets. He has to be involved to some degree. And I was thinking maybe we'd get Shanks meeting Luffy this year, but I don't see it happening. I think Elbaf has so many moving parts, and I know we are getting Shanks build up in the last couple of chapters, but I just don't see him meeting Luffy. And if he does, it would have to be a thing where he scares the shit out of Emu. Imagine how crazy Shanks is going to get glazed if he's the one who comes in and nullifies it. And it's not Brook, it's not Luffy, it's not Loki. Imagine Shanks comes in and finishes the job, nullifying that hold. Because Emu's not going anywhere. He's not dying. No one's stronger than Emu. But with Emu preoccupied on the Holy Land right now, we're assuming, he's splitting his focus two ways, so you can argue he's less strong. And I could definitely see a whole thing at one stage where the hold on the God Knights is taken away and Emu restores all his power. Like, the idea that the God Knights make Emu weaker is an interesting thing, I think. Because then if we take them away, I know it feels like the opposite was said in the previous chapter, where every time a God Knight dies, it causes strain on Emu. But I think there's a difference between when they are killed, and when Emu decides to get rid of them. I think there's a big, huge difference there. Because he didn't seem to have any issues with getting rid of Saturn. But when it came to, Harold dying, that caused an issue, a big problem. So there's a lot of different approaches that can be taken with that, But I do feel that's an easy way to make him stronger in the final war while still having him be a powerhouse here and not undermining that as a villain. But also, I feel like if he is undermined here as a villain by being in whatever way Oda decides to take him out in this arc, or undo his spells in this arc, if he does it in a way that undermines Emu's power as a villain, it helps my case with Blackbeard, I really don't know where the Gunko stuff is going. I know a lot of people think Elbaf is nearly over. I feel like it's really not, because we still need to have a whole Brook thing going on, and Brook was mentioned again. Then we have the Usopp stuff. I was so confident that Ragnar was going to go to Usopp, but I don't know now what the story is. Like, it could be a whole thing where Loki and Howard get knocked down and Ragnar goes loose, and then at that stage Usopp takes it up and we see that. Like, we do need to see this Usopp moment happen. Like, Oda's still bringing him up in the sidelines, building him up even bit by bit. Even with Wano, he had a small moment. Like, Oda is still remembering Usopp. He needs to do this. He needs to have something. And I think the Zoro versus Usopp idea, or Zoro with Usopp fighting Dorian Broggy, is a really cool idea. The only problem with this idea is the fact that, Loki and Howard, and being brothers, have a very strong reason to fight these two as a duo. And then obviously you have the normal duo of Zoro and Sanji, and them being a very strong duo that need to be involved in some sort of fight. And Sanji could fight Summers, actually. Sanji fighting Summers and Jinbei fighting the dragon. Is it? I can't remember the guy's name, man. The guy with the fangs. The Holy Knight with the fangs, And, like, to a certain degree, I am very much down for that combination, but I just think the amount of different angles you can take with the Dorian Broggy fight are very exciting, because either way, you're going to get a crazy fight. You either get a big fight with everything in it, where we start off with, like, Zoro and Usopp, and we get some Usopp moments, and it builds. Maybe even then we move Usopp to other fights. Like, let's say he has a moment in, God, even Luffy and Emu, even if that happens and we get a moment with Usopp and Emu, that'd be crazy, man. People would be losing their shit if that happened, and it would be so funny. But I think Oda is going to pull this off fantastically, and I cannot wait. But one other thing I wanted to talk about, I've been talking a lot about matchups now because I feel like it's been very important in this chapter. We do see Harden hasn't fully forgiven Loki, because during this whole speech that Yarl makes about the fact that they are going to protect the peace of Elbath. He mentions that Loki is innocent, and Harden goes, "Don't go too far, old man." So I'm very interested to see this, like, their relationship be resolved, and maybe even further in different moments that we will further see about their past. Because Harden, although he was involved in the flashback, wasn't a major part. But obviously they are brothers and they're gonna have moments together and small panel flashbacks and things. So I really want to see this happen. And I've been talking about Usopp getting a power up. Harden might get a power up, He's gonna be around such powerful hockey users, and he might evolve in a way that he's able to accept, that is acceptable, and he's able to accept kind of more power and being able to protect Elbath on his own or with his brother, and he'll accept the help. Because his whole thing in Dressrosa was he wanted to be strong enough to be king of Elbath, because he's not stronger than his father. But Loki is. So if he becomes strong enough to stand side by side with Loki, or at least to a certain degree, to an equivalent to Loki, he doesn't have to be like, Harold level, but the two of them together would be stronger than Harold, like, in his totality. Like, we could say Loki is stronger than Harold. He beat Harold, right, in dummy reversey or whatever. But you could argue that with two of them of similar power, they would be able to support Elbath, and they have different views on how Elbath should be supported, so it would cause less of what happened with Harold. They won't bend the knee because they understand their history. They've seen what the world government do. And I honestly think, like, I don't think people understand how good this is for Jarl. Like, it's so good for Jarl as a character, this whole speech and mentioning, what is it he says word for word about something that happens later on? Like, this is when he says he's going to stand against the world government. The world is bound to face a great divide one day. So this is when the Great War happens, right? And obviously now we have Luffy's first major country ally that have actively declared disobedience with the world government is Elbath. This is a crazy moment, and Jarl was the one to do this. This is incredible, and this is the start. This is arguably the start to the Great War that we've been talking, the final war of One Piece that we've been talking about. This is arguably the start of that, because now we have a declaration from Elbath. They actively stand against the world government. This isn't pirates. This isn't revolutionaries. This is a country that has been relatively neutral for the last couple of 50 to 100 years, because, Harold has wanted peace and he's tried to negotiate different ways. He was nearly in the world government. So this is standing on Elbath's principles and what they believe, while also keeping Harold's want for peace, And now the declaration of war, basically, from Jarl, like, being the character to set that off, is very interesting. He isn't the fool I thought he was going to be, or like the backstabber. He actually is like the character he is portrayed to be, which is very, very interesting. But this, man, it feels a bit concerning, because obviously it feels like One Piece is coming to an end, We're actually getting the declaration for the final war by the looks of things. That's what I consider this to be. And I don't know, man. I'm excited but also concerned, because I love One Piece, man. I want it to be around forever. But oh man, it's just so exciting, isn't it? Every chapter brings something new and incredible, and I can't wait. I can't wait for the next one. I really can't. It's an amazing series, man. I always say it and I always talk about it, but every chapter reaffirms that to me in every way. Even, like, there was a panel here with all the nightmares in it, and it's just such an incredible panel. It's just mental, man. How does he do this, man? And it also kind of looks like the mural in certain ways, which I think is an interesting mirror of the mural. And also another adaptation of a Western dragon. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. As I said, I've been getting into the One Piece card game, and I saw like Dragon 13 from Punk Hazard, and I realized they haven't had a Western dragon like Devil Fruit or like dragon that wasn't like a creation from somewhere, but it has to come from somebody. It has to be visualized from somebody, because otherwise all the dragons would look like Kaido. So who in the One Piece world had that fruit? And was it Loki? You know, was it Loki where they got that gene pool from? Like, where did that come from? Or is it going to be a creation by Vegapunk by splicing Kaido's genes with something else to create the Western style dragon? There's a lot of different takes you could take from that idea, you know? But I'm fascinated by this, man. I'm fascinated by everything. But with that being said, we'll go into further detail later on. I'm hoping you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a fantastic day. And I'll see you all next time. Cheers.